What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my most played video games. As somebody who reviews games just generally, but also after 100%, I tend to spend a lot of time with a lot of titles, but it's actually probably worth mentioning that it really is a lot of titles. Much of my playtime is split between a ton of different games, and most games, even longer ones, are gonna run you like 50 to 100 hours to 100%. There are exceptions, obviously, and we'll get into those, at least as far as this channel is concerned. But I personally don't tend to spend, like thousands of hours with a single game. And yet, in spite of that, there are games that I have spent much more than the required amount of time on. And if you've watched the channel pretty much at all, I'm sure you could guess a handful of them at the very least, which is why I expanded this list to 10, because I think some of the bottom ones here are more interesting generally, just to know how much I have played them. But either way, I wanted to make this video because somebody had mentioned it in a comment more or less not all that long ago, and it's not something that I had looked at personally in quite some time, and I thought maybe people would find that interesting, given that most of what I do is play video games all day. With that in mind though, before we jump into this fully, there's a couple of games worth mentioning that I frankly have no idea how long I have played for, but I know it's a lot, and because I have no way of really verifying the hours on it, I'm just not going to include them. This includes things like Diablo 2, Oblivion, and basically any MMO style game. This is more about the single player games that I've covered here on the channel. So Diablo 2 I played a ton in middle school. It was really important to me at the time, but I couldn't even begin to estimate hours on that, which is a not dissimilar case for Oblivion, which I played, throughout high school, really. But that was before I was on Steam and, hours were being tracked. I've bought Oblivion on Steam since then, but collectively, no idea. But with those exceptions out of the way, let's dive into it and talk about this first. So, coming in at number 10, we've got Tactics Ogre Reborn. This is a remake of a very influential SRPG, or TRPG as I prefer to call them, that really set a lot of standards for that genre alongside a couple of other games from way back when. Tactics Ogre Reborn, however, is a more recent remake of that, and a pretty good way to experience a classic, though pretty much most of my time with this game can be attributed to an optional dungeon called Palace of the Dead, which is a gigantic dungeon that will take you quite some time to clear, so much of my 180 hours with this one is down to the Palace of the Dead. Which brings us to number 9. So number 9 is actually Red Dead Redemption 2, coming in at 234 hours, give or take. So Red Dead here is actually one of my original reviews on the channel. Most people don't even know I have reviewed it because that review is so old, and as a result, to be honest, probably not very good. Like a great many people though, I really enjoyed Red Dead Redemption 2, which is why I played it so much, and by far what took the longest there was tracking down all the animals so you could study them and skin them, in fact, on top of a whole bunch of other collectibles like getting gold medals and a bunch of the missions, and that's to say nothing of the online stuff, so it was a lot. But it's a really rewarding game to play, so I didn't really mind too much. Coming in at number 8, however, we then have Fallout 4 with 239 hours. Some of these hours are fairly recent, as I played it a bunch when it launched, with its DLC and everything over the course of that time period, but very recently, back in December actually, I quickly ran through it again to get footage to actually review it, as this was another one of my original reviews that was very, very bad, and I wanted to sort of update and take another swing at it, which went much better this time around, as you might imagine, being almost 10 years later. And as I discuss in that review, there's a lot of things I like about Fallout 4 and a lot of things that I don't think went over very well at all, which frankly we don't have time to get into here, which is why we're moving on to number 7, which is Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader with 249 hours. Now, a lot of that is from the game's original release, of course, but a little more recently, just in the middle of last year in 2024, it got its big Void Shadows DLC, which I played a bunch, alongside its Grim Darkness mode to knock out that stuff, and I imagine it'll actually keep climbing when they release their next DLC, Lex Imperialis, and anything after that. So this is one I would very much so expect to keep going up in the rankings, especially since there's only a single hour that separates it and number 6, which is Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. Deadfire, coming in at 250 hours. Now, about 80 of those hours are very recent. Back in December, actually, I completed a run of the Ultimate, which is still currently being verified over at Obsidian. They're like 2/3 of the way through it. It's been a bit slow with the lead up to Avowed and then Christmas, because I did it in December, of course. Either way, Deadfire is a tremendous game. It's definitely in my top 10 CRPGs, and I've played quite a few. More than anything, though, I really do love the world of Eora that they set up here, and all the improvements it brings from the original as well. So running back through that again in December before the lead up to Avowed, of course, was something I wanted to do, and as part of the Ultimate, mind you, is a pretty big part of why this game has so many hours for me, at least. But moving from number 6 to number 5, we have a very large jump with The Witcher 3 coming in at 446 hours. I was a very big fan of the Witcher series back before they were cool, but like most people, I was very excited to play The Witcher 3, and it was a tremendous game, and as you can tell, I've played it a lot. But that said, it's a big game, there's a lot to do. My first playthrough of it, like full clearing absolutely everything, was like 100 hours all on its own. And that was before the 2 gigantic expansions, Heart of Stone and Blood and Wine, so I probably don't need to explain to too many people why this took quite as long as it did. But moving into the top 4 here, we start seeing the usual suspects that I imagine most people would have guessed when they clicked on this video from me, starting with Divinity Original Sin 2. I have 491.5 hours in Divinity Original Sin 2. Quite some time ago now, I was basically a Divinity lore channel covering everything there was to know about the Divinity franchise, essentially, and I got started doing that because of jumping into Original Sin 2 and just loving it so much. I was like, I gotta know everything about these games. And that is exactly what I went on to do. In fact, I would go so far as to say that a lot of what I do now, especially in terms of reviews and covering CRPGs and stuff, can very much so be credited to Original Sin 2 here, sort of reigniting that passion in me, as I was pretty fully committed to my salaried sales job at the time. But seriously, I love that game, I love that franchise, which is why I made a million videos about it. Now, given how fond I am of Larian's work, it's probably no surprise then, at number 3, we've got Baldur's Gate 3, at 534.5 hours. I did something like a dozen full playthroughs of this game. I am absolutely positive I am one of the first people outside of Larian Studios to have finished it, and with them adding honor mode and being incredibly receptive to feedback that people offered post-launch, I had a lot of fun running through this game. Though I will say by the time I got done with all of those playthroughs, I was pretty burnt out on it. And I'm doing better now because I've had a break, but I was definitely pushing myself to the max of like, this is as much of this game that I want to play, really? Because absolutely burning through that many hours of a game that quickly after launch, like within a couple of months, mind you, I was ready to just play some other stuff. Looking to the future, though, they're, stress testing right now, patch 8, which is supposed to bring those 12 new subclasses, which I plan on checking out, even if I don't do a full playthrough, mind you. So there's a little more Baldur's Gate 3 left to go in the future, but even if I do play it a bunch more, I doubt I will ever surpass what I've done with our second entry, which is, in fact, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous from Owlcat Games. My most covered game by far. It's probably the one people know me for the best, even if Baldur's Gate 3 was definitely like the peak in terms of like traffic and whatnot to the channel. Wrath of the Righteous is largely what my sort of claim to fame would be, and I have spent about 763.5 hours with the retail version of the game, and then I actually had about another 150 hours in the beta of the game, which was a separate entry in Steam, so to speak, so it was different hours. So collectively, probably more like 900-ish, and that's just not an amount of time you spend with a video game you don't enjoy. And yes, I'm sure there are humorous little jokes you could make about how, oh, this game is terrible, but I can't stop playing it, sure. Internet jokes aside, you gotta be pretty bought in to play a game for 900 hours. And also cover it pretty much backwards and forwards. There's almost nothing about this game I have not touched or talked about in some form or fashion on the channel. There's even a full live stream of me doing an Iron Man playthrough for a competition even. And while it's certainly not my most watched game that I've covered, I very much so consider like the 5-hour roughly story video that I did for this one after they finished up all the DLC last year to be like sort of my own little magnum opus. That was an insane amount of work. And yet, it's only number 2. So what could possibly be my most played game? Well, probably unsurprisingly to most people, it is in fact Skyrim. You see, Skyrim is an interesting one because if you were to go by a single entry, I've only played it for like 200 to 400 hours, but Skyrim has been released on so many different platforms that collectively well over 1,000 hours. I don't have the exact number for you, but I've got over 700 hours of it just on Steam alone. In fact, Skyrim was my very first Steam game. I have the original copy of it that I bought, which was a copy of it that forced you to register it to a Steam account in order to play. It was one of the last physical games I bought, and it's the reason I have a Steam account. I mean, I would have had one eventually, I imagine, just looking at the market, mind you, but it was the catalyst for that. And they've since released many different versions. In fact, I own a Nintendo Switch, which mostly my son uses these days, but I actually have Skyrim on that, and I used to bring that to work when I worked third shift to play at work on my lunch breaks. And I did that for literally years. Which, to be honest, isn't really that crazy of a story given how long that game's been out, because while I think Skyrim does face a lot of valid criticisms, I think people also forget that it's a game from 2011, and the fact that it has captured people's interest this long, with no small effort of the modding community, mind you, is a testament to just how great that game really is, and I think any argument to the contrary is, honestly, probably just trying to be contrarian. Because sure, there are plenty of things I don't like about Skyrim, but to act like that game is anything but a great game is nonsense. Which is, simply put, why I played it so much. But that has been my top 10 most played games, which hopefully you found interesting and enjoyable. I thought it was kind of neat to go back through and look at some of these games that I've played a ton, which is funny because I know some people will play like a single game for thousands and thousands of hours, but for me and what I do, I think any game that I spend more time with than the sort of required amount to get it done is probably noteworthy because it says that, this game has something I enjoy more than just that experience, and I have to keep playing it afterwards because I want to. And with as many games as I play, games like that sort of demand my attention, I think are games worth talking about, which is why I focus on them so much. But that is pretty much going to do it for this particular video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. This particular video is a little out of the ordinary, but generally I review games. Though regardless of all that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.